Okay, so welcome everyone. I'm sure other people will hop on, hopefully. This is the first of a couple meetings we're having this week. So this one is really targeted to the people who live in the neighborhoods that are near downtown that were subject of the housing study. We have, you'll hear lots and lots about this over the course of this presentation. But these are the neighborhoods that we've met with specifically in the past and worked through the details of what an overlay could look like on those neighborhoods. So this is coming back to you with some more of that detail that shows kind of how we worked through the issues and the things that were presented to us. So, so that's the purpose of this meeting. The Thursday night meeting is still talking about neighborhood infill amendments, but it's really a citywide scope. So we'll talk less about specifically what an overlay that pertains to just the downtown neighborhoods will look like, because there are a few citywide changes that that we're proposing as well. So that will be just a more broad meeting and not so specific to these neighborhoods. So that's what Thursday night's meeting is. And that's why when I was saying the number of attendees, it's so much greater, because this one, I believe, was the invitation list. We were generally targeting these neighborhoods, not necessarily a larger citywide audience, because it wouldn't apply that broadly. So that's what is going on Thursday. Same time, 6 o'clock. So if you want to attend that one, you can go onto our website and register for that as well. So thanks for being here, and appreciate it. And hopefully you'll learn something that you didn't know, and you'll be able to ask us some good questions that'll help us even think about things in ways we haven't. So it's really just an exchange of information. Before I get started, let's see, I do want to thank Councilor Hall Harper and Councilor McKee for being here. Thanks so much. If you're familiar with the downtown housing study and those boundaries, those neighborhoods near downtown are either in Councilor McKee or Councilor Hall Harper's district. So they have been involved with us the entire way, and appreciate they're doing that and helping us kind of get your input and then just support it and help promote the things that this could do for your neighborhood. Let me introduce who from the planning office is on the call. So I'm Susan Miller. I'm the director of planning with the planning office. Travis Hulse is the principal planner for planning and design group, which does a lot of the urban design work, also long range planning. Nathan Foster is on the call, and he is a senior planner in current planning. And then Amy Almer, she's been kind of our person that has kept us on track. She's a planner in the planning and design group. So that is who's on the call tonight, and you'll talk with us more as this meeting goes on. We had a series of these meetings in January, I think kind of end of January. At that point, we called it the missing middle housing meetings, or whatever our title was, but it wasn't the neighborhood infill overlay. Missing middle housing, this overlay is really to facilitate that type of missing middle housing that we don't see, or that we don't help facilitate that type of development very, very easily here. So it's to fix that. At that time, I think we had about 5 meetings with specific to a neighborhood or maybe a pair of neighborhoods. So we had, those were fairly well attended, and we did get a lot of input that we've met our group, the 4 of us here and a few others, and talked about over time and tried to consider and work through some of those issues. So that's what we've been doing, and just getting some of the technical details down and worked through. So the purpose of this meeting is to share that with you and, see what kind of questions you have or additional comments, anything we can do to make it better. As we go, if you have not seen that draft, it is on our website at tulsaplanning.org/housing. Also, I know a lot more people are signed up than are here, but I want to let you know we're videotaping this meeting, and we will send it to everybody that registered. So you could, it'll be on I believe it'll be on our planning office YouTube channel. And so you can share it with people even that didn't register, or whatever, it's just another source of information that can help people understand what's going on. So that, I also wanted to just mention, this is a webinar format, which is we learned in the early part of this year that we needed a different format because we were getting hacked in our public meetings. So this does allow, this is less flexible for everyone just to kind of chime in because of that, whatever that we experienced in January. We kind of, I think we're a little vulnerable to some really kind of interesting stuff. So because of the webinar format, everybody's going to be muted as we go through the information. And then when we get to the Q&A section at the end of the presentation, and we hope that our presentation is not going to be more than 20 minutes, maybe less. When we get to that point, or even as the meeting progresses, we hope that you're entering questions in the Q&A section in the format here. You can see that probably at the bottom of your screen. And then we will, and I know in the past we've seen those pop up and even tried to answer those as we go through the presentation. And if we don't, we'll definitely do that when we conclude. And then once we get to that section, if you want to be unmuted and have a conversation with us or follow-up question, whatever you might want to do, just raise your hand on the bottom bar. Okay. All right. I'm not really seeing it right now, but okay. I hope you can see it. Anyway, so that's really what we're going to do here. So, as you know, I kind of set it up. Travis is going to talk really about what led us here, kind of the big picture policy that made us need to start having this conversation and working on this. Nathan will talk about the specifics of what the overlay looks like and what that means and what the code changes would be. And then I'll come back again and talk about, well, where we will go from here. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Travis.
Thanks. Well, hi, everyone. Glad to be with you. Glad to, I guess I don't physically see you, but I know you're there. So yeah, I mean, as Susan mentioned, the housing study is really what kind of restarted the conversation around housing specifically. Looking at the neighborhoods around downtown. Many of you, probably most of you at this point, have heard about that, have participated in it in some way, but just kind of getting us on the same page. The housing study is what led us to start looking at issues like affordability, housing choice, living preferences, what do people want to see in their neighborhoods, all those types of things. And so one of the key actions that came out of that effort was a recommendation that we look at what barriers there are. And there again, you'll see this term missing middle infill development. And really what that means is essentially just new housing in existing neighborhoods. And this is a conversation that we've been having for a while now. The housing study, like I said, kind of started it. But we have a lot of small area plans and adopted plans at the city that have led that conversation. On this next slide, you can see examples of those. Many of you, again, probably participated in these. Crosby Heights, the Pearl District, Unity Heritage Neighborhoods, Crutchfield. There's a lot of different goals and priorities that were mentioned throughout those conversations from you all, from many of the other stakeholders, telling us that we need to look at housing and we need to understand what's going on in the neighborhoods around downtown. A lot of times we spend so much effort and planning in downtown within the IDL specifically, and we kind of ignore the neighborhoods in the surrounding areas. So it was important that we include that as a part of this conversation and quite honestly focus a lot of our efforts in those neighborhoods rather than focusing so much in downtown. The next slide, you'll see this is kind of the condition. This is maybe what's going on in many of your neighborhoods. All of these photos were taken from different parts of the kind of areas surrounding downtown. We have abandoned homes that probably need to be demolished. We have vacant lots. We have new homes. We're seeing a lot of different market dynamics at play right now. And I think it provides a really unique and exciting opportunity to one, have this conversation and to start thinking about how do we address these things to bring stability to neighborhoods, bring affordability, answering some of those bigger questions that we've been talking about and hearing about for quite some time. So, this is what we're looking at. And as we've started thinking about this, we've kind of been asking ourselves, okay, what tools are available? The zoning code is something that we at the Tulsa Planning Office really have, I want to say, control over, because it goes through the Planning Commission and City Council for any type of amendments like what we're going to propose tonight. But it's something that we take ownership over and really is kind of in our wheelhouse, something that we need to look at. So that's where we've spent a lot of our time. So when we talk about missing middle and infill, this is again is probably the best graphic or best way to explain that. We're talking about something in between single family detached homes and your kind of larger multifamily apartment complexes. Tonight we're gonna present to you what we believe is the happy medium, not even seeing all of these examples and what we're gonna suggest would be allowed in some of the neighborhoods surrounding downtown. So you'll see duplexes, you'll see townhomes, courtyard apartments, multi-unit homes. We'll go over those. This is what we mean, but really what we're talking about is bringing new housing into existing neighborhoods when we talk about this. So you have been a part of this conversation now for about a year. You've probably heard me say these same things. I think what's important to kind of recognize, Susan mentioned, there's a lot of great feedback that you've brought to us and guiding us as we've been trying to develop what this tool would be, an overlay, a neighborhood infill overlay. We've talked with you about parking, we've talked about density, we've talked about compatibility, bringing new homes into existing neighborhoods always, proposes lots of benefits, but there's also some concerns. So as we've gone through this over the past year or so, meeting with you, meeting with local builders and developers, city councilors, all sorts of folks with different perspectives, I think we've taken a lot of that input and incorporated some specific things into the overlay that we're going to present to you tonight. And I think most important, for tonight is we really want to make sure you understand what this means. So if there's questions that you have about, okay, you said a lot of things, but I don't know exactly what this means, just tell us that. We'll try to be simple, try to kind of just make it clear, but we get lost in the details a little bit. So that's the point of tonight. We want to make sure that we're being clear about what the overlay will do, what that might look like, as is going to be proposed to the Planning Commission here next month in June. So we've had a ton of great input, a lot of great feedback, and we hope that you see this as something that we're moving forward from a conversation that we've been having with you for quite some time now. Susan again mentioned this. I just want to reiterate that when we're talking about those neighborhoods within the housing study boundary and where this overlay we think will initially make the most sense for the benefit of having those vacant lots, having new market trends, start to see an interest in some of these neighborhoods, we see the greatest opportunity to start here. That doesn't mean that other neighborhoods throughout the city couldn't apply something similar, but these are really the areas that we're focused on. So downtown will not be included in what we're proposing. It will be all of those areas highlighted in blue. So this follows, again, just very closely with that housing study boundary, but this is going to be where we focus. So Nathan, I think will take it over and really kind of get into the details of what the overlay includes, what that will propose, and we'll go from there.
So thanks, Travis. Before I go into the details of kind of what we've included in the draft and what we're proposing for those specific neighborhoods, I just wanted a little bit of background on what the overlay tool is and how it impacts you or what it can accomplish. So we updated our zoning code in 2015, and we added this tool as an option because, as many of you may already know, the way our zoning works is a very basic zoning use like you would see in a lot of major municipalities across the nation. And we have, defined areas where commercial makes sense, where residential uses make sense, be it multifamily or single family, where the office uses are, where all of those things fit. And with a city like Tulsa, in many areas, there's extreme diversity in what that is. And so what happens very often is that there are areas of the city that maybe don't fit as nicely into that zoning pattern as some other areas. And so when we want to go into somewhere geographically and define something that makes more sense, what we can use is an overlay tool. And what the overlay does is just sit on top of whatever those existing underlying zoning districts are, and we can tweak and change those zoning standards to accommodate whatever those policies and adopted recommendations may be that Travis talked about, be it the housing policies from the housing study or just things from our comprehensive plan or small area plans. And so when we look at doing an overlay, we generally are trying to implement some of those goals by a very kind of collective process that does it in a holistic way instead of doing it in a piecemealed way where we go in and try to rezone individual properties or change zoning on individual properties. This just sets up a standard for the entire area that we think is appropriate. So that really covers kind of how that zoning overlay tool works. The next thing I want to cover is really where the purpose of this overlay is coming from. So echoing a lot of the things that Travis talked to you about that came from those plans, we saw really that we were one of the primary barriers standing in the way of those recommendations and those feedbacks that we had heard from the neighborhoods about what they wanted or what they would support in their neighborhood. And then on the other side of that, what the housing study and what our own research was telling us was the demand in some of these areas. And so what we've done is just kind of outlined what those purposes were, starting with affordability. As you guys may know, adding a variety of housing types beyond just a single family detached house can greatly increase the affordability of a neighborhood by providing options and providing people with either lesser maintenance of an overall lot or land, but also providing rental options for those that aren't ready to buy yet or still saving. So this is a step in the right direction to try and open up those options and create them in these neighborhoods and these opportunities. That plays into the expanded choices purpose. But then finally, really, it's about adding more users onto the existing infrastructure that we have and that we've paid for, be it the streets, the water lines, the sewer lines, the sidewalks. And really what we're talking about in this perspective when we're saying these housing study neighborhoods is really vibrant, walkable urban neighborhoods that we want to maintain and give people the ability to invest and be confident that those types of neighborhoods can support these uses beyond just the typical single family neighborhood. And quite frankly, if you look at a lot of the areas we're talking about, you already see that. And that's a result of things that were developed before the regulations of today were adopted. So we adopted a new zoning code in 1970 that really changed the framework for how our regulations in the city of Tulsa worked. And how that impacted some of these uses was by creating nonconformities, be it the lot that they're sitting on, the use that they have established there. And so that can often be a deterrent for folks to either invest and buy and improve these properties, or also just invest and create new opportunities for development where a lot may be sitting vacant just because the zoning code really prohibits it from being developed. So as we started talking about the infill, we started talking about these things that are on the screen now and how the zoning code is really the main barrier to accomplishing some of those goals, starting with the uses. So anywhere in town where there's an existing RS zoning district, which stands for residential single family, that prohibits most lots in the neighborhood from being used for any purpose other than just a single family home. When looking at that housing study and the recommendations that we got from that and the feedback we received from the neighborhoods, we realized we were really prohibiting some of the desired things that people move to those neighborhoods for, and the existing things that were already established that made it different and that gave it that variety. And so what we want to do is make sure we're not standing in the way of that. And what we can do is alter those zoning regulations for that defined area to start opening up allowances for more of those uses so that vacant lots and underdeveloped or under-maintained lots can be invested in and new opportunities can be created. So there's a list of uses on the screen now, but I'm going to go into each of those in more detail. But first, I'll talk a little bit about reducing lot and building regulations. So when our code was adopted, a lot of lots immediately became non-conforming to the zoning because we adopted greater lot widths, greater lot areas, and we required people to really have more property in order to establish even a single family home on the properties that existed today. So those are all operating really under what's called a legal non-conforming status because of the way they were established before the zoning regulations. So in the overlay, what we sought to do is try and align the zoning regulations with the lot patterns that we saw in these neighborhoods. And just the snippet on the screen kind of shows an example where really we have lots that are less than 50 feet wide in an area where the zoning code would say you have to have a 60-foot wide lot to even develop or do anything with it. So we want to adjust the lot regulations to match what's there today, to not only open up opportunities for new development, but to also remove some of those nonconformities that exist on properties today. And that's done by reducing minimum lot widths that are required. Not saying that everything has to meet that minimum lot width, but just saying that anything is within that window could be considered a compliant lot. Also, lot areas would have to be adjusted. And then we have lot area per units that say how many units can go on a lot. So to accomplish any of these new building types that we're talking about, we would have to adjust that as well. So the overlay goes in and tweaks each of those standards to ensure that these additional uses can still be accomplished on those smaller lots. And the final piece of that is thinking about parking. So since the 70s, we've required minimum parking for any sort of use that gets established in the city of Tulsa. And as you guys may know, parking lots can eat up real estate very quickly, and they're not very good neighborhood uses. They're not something that adds any vibrancy. They don't have a lot of life to them. They're mostly annoyances to other neighbors. And when we looked at our zoning code and we kind of reconciled it with the recommendations from our other policies, what we learned was we were over requiring parking most of the time for these types of uses. In general, the folks that were moving into these apartments or using these townhomes would maybe need one space when the code was requiring 2+ spaces for the overall development. And so quickly you see green space, existing mature trees, other things being eaten up very quickly by paving and concrete and parking spaces. And so what we did was reduce those parking requirements within the overlay area to make sure that when a development was proposed, they were providing adequate parking for the uses they wanted, but they weren't over requiring it, and it wasn't requiring them to then buy additional property and tear down homes or remove vegetation, and instead allowing them to just utilize the space that they had to accommodate some of those uses. And what we believe is that really these lots have the space for that and they can accommodate it given the right parameters, but we just needed to make that an opportunity and an option for people as they were going through this process. The final piece on parking that I'll mention is that in the same vein as what I said about parking being a little bit of a dead use when it comes to a neighborhood and when you're walking down the street, we didn't want apartment buildings being established in a way that would push the building to the back of the lot and build parking lots on the street down the neighborhood. So within the overlay area, if someone were to adopt one of these new uses and try to utilize it, the parking requirements state that it has to be within the rear. The one exception to that would be something like a duplex where a driveway with a typical garage could be accommodated versus like an apartment or a townhome where we want to see more rear entry and options for the ability to either use existing alleyways or provide that space for the cars to make it to the back of the building so that we keep those entrances and those facades up to the street and up to the sidewalk and maintain that character that exists today within some of these neighborhoods. So in the next few slides, what I'm going to talk about are just those individual building types, starting with the townhomes. I think most people probably know what a townhome is, but for the purposes of the zoning code, it's an attached single unit on a single lot. So they're each owned individually by one owner, but they do share a common wall, and often they are on reduced lot sizes. So they don't meet those typical single family neighborhood size requirements. In the overlay, what we've done is really maintain what's already allowed in terms of townhomes, but made sure that they were available to those in those other zoning districts that previously would have been exclusively single family home neighborhoods. And so this optimizes the real estate that's available and the property that's there to accommodate additional units where there's available space. The next one is a duplex, which is again pretty self-explanatory and pretty prevalent within the city of Tulsa. This is 2 units sharing one lot. So you have 2 opportunities for dwelling units on a single lot, and an owner can live in one and rent the other, or it can be a rental property, but it does provide more affordability just because of the size and the shared maintenance and the ability to essentially maximize the use of that lot by adding an additional unit. This can be a side-by-side. It can also be something that's pictured here on the screen in 19th and Cincinnati, which is a stacked duplex, which means you're putting 2 units on one lot, but one is above the other. So there's options for how to do that. And then the renderings on the right side of the page really illustrate a few examples of where duplexes already fit into existing neighborhood characters and really don't look any different than a single family home on the same block. Cottage house developments are very unique, and they're different. There's something that we don't have a lot of examples of within the city of Tulsa, but what it offers is an option to essentially establish some sort of a village configuration of new housing units. So these are individual 1-unit homes, but they're situated in a way that allows for a smaller building around a common open space and sets up more of a communal I would say dynamic than something typical of where all the houses face the street and they're all just kind of in line with each other. And it creates more of a community feel. And so this is something that is very different and is something we adopted in our new zoning code, but offers, again, the opportunity to take existing lots and create something different and new while maintaining a vibrant, walkable neighborhood. Multi-unit houses are also prevalent in Tulsa, similar to duplexes, but accommodating more units. So this is an example of something with 3 or 4 units sharing one lot, but maintaining just one single entrance, a street-facing entrance that makes it match more of a single-family home character. So this is another use that would have been prohibited previously in neighborhoods that were exclusively single-family, but we feel fit within the same building envelope as single family homes while offering more affordability and more diversity of housing within a neighborhood. And so without changing the character of the neighborhood, you really do create more options. You add more ability for either folks entering their career or for starting a family to find a place to live that's well situated near downtown and utilizes that public infrastructure in the way we've stated in our purposes. Apartments are the final use that we talked about including. This is another thing that exists in a lot of these neighborhoods already. Some of these are maybe familiar buildings that you see on the screen, but there are a lot of existing up to 8-plex apartments within some of the single family neighborhoods that were either built in the early 1900s and have just been grandfathered in or received additional zoning approvals and changes throughout the years to be accommodated. And so when looking at some of the recommendations of the housing study and the things that we heard, apartments are another one that people see already existing in their neighborhood. They think it's a good idea that more could be added and that this housing could change the way the neighborhood looks. But we did put a limitation of 8 units because we feel like there is a line where often things become too much of an apartment complex versus something that is within character of the neighborhood. And so applying that maximum of 8 units and still obviously having to comply with some parking requirements limits still the density of what can be accomplished on the lots within these neighborhoods. So with that, I think I turn it back to Susan so she can explain about how we take the overlay I'm explaining today and the text amendments that we've proposed and turn that into an effective zoning for the neighborhoods that we've shown you.
Okay, so I'll kind of talk you through what the rest of this process might look like. So this is us today in May, kind of circling back around and talking with these specific neighborhoods again and showing you what we've come up with since the last time we talked. Specifically, June 2nd, we are planning to move forward to the Planning Commission or TMAPC. So we will provide those amendments to them. We've met or had several meetings with them about talking about the concept and some of the details. So this is when they will really look at that. So if you want to provide, once it comes to that point, if you want to provide comments to the Planning Commission on June 2nd, we have, well, actually we have several options. You can either come in person, it starts at 1 o'clock on a Wednesday afternoon and speak. You could also join virtually, provide your comments that way, or you could submit comments to us in writing at esubmit@incog.org. So any of those ways you can give us comments. And then after after it goes to planning commission, planning commission comes up with a recommendation. It will go through city council and continue that path. And at the same time, we've talked with that the second step of all of this is really what area to apply the overlay to. Of course, we've targeted these areas near downtown. And the boundaries of those are really what is the next step to try to define exactly what the boundary is. Maybe there's some properties on the edges that don't quite make sense, or maybe there's some outside the edges that make sense to include as well. So it's really kind of getting down to a more specific scale on where this would be appropriate to apply. So we will, Councilor McKee or Hall Harper, I can't even remember which one specifically we talked to about it. I think it was McKee. She has, yeah, there you go. So she's volunteered to, once we get to this point, to initiate or to ask the council to initiate map amendments to the area that we would apply the text to. And then what we want to do at that point, once council initiates it, we want to send out, well, we have to send out mail notices to everyone within the boundary and within 300 feet of the boundary for the map amendment TMAPC hearing, which we're thinking will be about October. But what we also want to do is send it out well in advance so that any discussions like this and more public meetings at that point, I don't know if it'll be this way or in person, I don't really know what the format will be, but that notice will serve as both, you can see when the public meetings will be held, as well as the planning commission meeting. So you'll get really a list of all of those opportunities to talk more with us and ask us questions and things like that. So I think that is about it. So then that we just have to work our way through that process, and those are details. I mean, we've done several overlays, and that's a lot of tedious and a lot of back and forth there. So definitely that'll be some pretty significant conversation we'll continue to have with everyone. And so really, if that all goes in a fairly timely manner, according to what we think is possible, it could be in place by the end of the year. So I think this is about it as far as the information. We'll go ahead and we can open, this is all of our contact information. Well, let me say a couple more things, because since not everyone that's on now was on the call when we started. This is me and Travis and Nathan, our contact information here. The draft is at tulsaplanning.org/housing. If you have any questions or comments for us, if you would enter that in the Q&A section of the webinar. This is a webinar format. So raise your hand if you want to talk or ask a question or a follow-up question, and then we can unmute you and talk with you. And I think that's about all. So we'll go ahead and see what you guys want to talk about tonight.
Looks like we've got a couple hands raised.
Hello?
Kevin, you're live with Tulsa Planning. What do you have to say?
Well, I got a question about 5.030-B table notes. Item 6, it says minimum interior side setbacks is 10 feet for apartment condo and permitted non-residential. How does that affect existing structures, or does it?
So I don't think it would impact anything that's already in place. Those would become essentially legal but non-conforming to the current regulation, and would only, I guess, impact them if there was an expansion or some sort of new addition to what was existing there today beyond what was allowed.
What about splitting a property? I have a client who has a property that has 3 or 4 buildings on it that somebody convinced him to combine them into a single lot. Will this impact it if he wants to subdivide off those properties again?
It would likely help him if they are residential uses that are in those
They're mixed use.
Oh, they're mixed use. So because we're reducing lot areas for those specific residential uses that we mentioned, those would be the only ones impacted. So the mixed use structures would just be still subject to the underlying zoning, whatever that might be, on those specific properties.
Part of the problem there is that one of his buildings is not, I don't think it's 25 feet wide. Isn't that the current requirement for them?
Well, that would be based on that underlying zoning district. I'm not sure which exactly that is zoned, the property you're talking about. But
The engine room or the
it'll be
former engine
subject
room?
to whatever that underlying zoning required. And if it didn't meet that and they still wanted to split it off, he'd just have to obtain probably a variance to get that lot to a conforming zoning, whatever that is. Because this is only the overlay, and I probably should have mentioned this when we were originally talking about it. It's probably helpful for everyone, but the overlay only impacts those uses that we've talked about. It doesn't impact someone with an existing single family home or even an existing commercial use or something within the boundary. It would only really come up if someone proposed or made additions or changes to one of the uses we've talked about.
Does it say that in the document, or could it say that in the document?
It should in the draft say that it applies only in those specific districts first. So it's the RE, RS, RM districts. And then to those uses that we've talked about within the overlay is where we've changed any of the regulations. But yeah, I mean, if that's not clear, that's the intent, is we're only touching those specific things we've talked about.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having the meeting. Kind of a hot topic in our house lately has been kind of like the declaration of water shortage in the West. And, you know, it's been a passion of John and mine for a while to, you know, sort of impact or implement low impact development, you know, at our home. And I was just kind of curious, what do you guys, how can we support this city in a wider, broader use of low impact development, as, you know, with these proposed changes? I'm going to assume density increases in our kind of stormwater system is, you know, built in the 20s and undersized in some areas. And we can, as a city, I would hope that we could, you know, start implementing these, you know, greener, more earth-friendly, eco-friendly practices across the city, like many other cities have done. And I was just kind of curious if you guys have had any consideration for that as density is going to increase across, you know, areas of downtown.
One thing I'll mention on that note is the city has definitely made some strides in adopting approvable low impact development measures that can be used as alternatives to certain things, specifically related to zoning. And I think probably the one place it comes up the most is with regard to parking areas. When we adopted the new zoning code, we added in the ability for people to use certain approved pervious surfaces versus the typical asphalt parking lot to allow them to offset some of those drainage issues and things that you mentioned. So that's a good thing. It's something that's out there and it's allowable. Where we haven't got to yet, and where it would really take some policy changes and shifts, would be actually requiring any of those as a part of a project. So we've kind of taken the steps to allow them as alternatives and allow those that wish to utilize them, but we don't actually require anyone to do them yet. But as a counter to that, any set of building plans or permits that go through the city of Tulsa are subject to a drainage review, as well as a water and a sewer review to ensure that the infrastructure is both capable and has the capacity to have that new development as a part of it. And if it weren't able to hold whatever the new water runoff was, then there would be requirements to make improvements to that system. So I think it is important to note that if something like this were proposed in the neighborhood, that it wouldn't be the straw that broke the camel's back if it came to the stormwater system or some other piece of infrastructure.
Okay. Do you have any thoughts on when or like what it would take to begin sort of implementing kind of those requirements? I'm just kind of randomly curious.
Sure. I mean, I think that would be it would be something the city would need to adopt as a policy. And, we have our city councilors are on the line tonight. And so that would really be an initiation of something through a decision-making body to adopt a new requirement or ordinance for the city of Tulsa to start actually implementing requirements for those types of things. And at this point, we've just never actually gotten to that point, but it's
Okay.
certainly, I think, a priority for a lot of people. And it's something we discuss often, which kind of leads to the improvements that have been made so far on what's allowed.
Okay.
Well, I was just going to add, the city has a stormwater quality team that they're very focused on low impact development and developing standards that would be appropriate. They have a stormwater criteria manual that's been adopted as of, I think, 2019 was kind of the latest update to that. I'm not sure how many of those policies like Nathan's talking about were officially included in there, but there's a whole group of people that would be cheering and happy hearing what you're talking about, Tara, and just trying to make that, more relevant. And
Yeah.
so Jacob Hagan is, I think, leading that. We could
Awesome.
certainly put you in touch with him as someone to maybe even understand where they're at in that conversation and get you some better answers.
That would be awesome.
I'll get that to you.
Thank you so much.
Excellent. I just wanted to jump in and say, I'd love for Jacob and Tara to meet and talk to each other. I've talked to both of them. I'm on the same page. We've got to find the right ways to start moving this. So Tara, talk to Jacob and then talk to me. I think we've got
I actually work with
so.
Jacob's wife. So it's a small world.
It is.
This Tulsa.
Yay, Tulsa.
Yeah, right?
Yeah, good deal.
Thank you, guys.
So hi, I'm Theron Warlick. I work for the city of Tulsa, but I'm speaking as a private citizen tonight. I wanted to, I sent you my comments in writing. I don't know if you can share them or not. They're graphic in a good way with pictures, like drawings. Well, now that I've said that, I think you have to show it because, okay. So first to Kevin's question, I know in the form-based code, we had a replacement of nonconformities that were destroyed by act of God. That is something that you might be able to use in an overlay again if you needed to. The second thing was I do believe the permeable paving and things were part of that 2015 batch of zoning changes. So my comments were generally about, and you were talking, Susan mentioned, where would you want to have alleyways? Or alleyways, I think, would be, where would you want to have the overlay extend to? And I think I think some of the things like lot widths, the very skinny 25-foot lot widths, I think those need to be where the alleys are. So if that helps you define it, if you look at the overlay areas, most of them already have alleyways. Where they don't, it might be more appropriate to look at the really cool cottage homes. And I know you showed a picture of those earlier. So that's really the extent of it. In terms of lot widths, I think it also has implications about the installation of infrastructure. If you go down to 25-foot lots, like Wicker Park in Chicago is fantastic, looks terrific, but it has to have alleys. What you need to think about is you're in Wicker Park. You can't stand your house. You can't get any utilities down the sides of the alleys, and then most of the time the front yard disappears as well. So they're using alleyways to run the utilities as well as the alleys themselves. And when you have those alleyways, you can also do granny flats in the back, which is terrific. So I would say anything goes. I love everything about these zoning changes. With those alleyways, I think you've got the most flexibility possible, where you don't have them cottage homes or something else. That's it and that really is all of my other comments are in writing.
Sure. So one of the things, Theron, that I was going to kind of mention is on most of the uses that we're talking about, we have a minimum of a 40-foot lot width, not a 25. I think the 25 only
Okay.
play when we're talking about townhouses as a development type or a building type. So it's
Okay.
not everywhere that you could just go down to a 25-foot lot width and accommodate any of these uses that are in there. But the other thing is just,
Would that,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
if I can cut you off, would that include area? I know this is really not public hearing, but would that also, you also have to have an alley there? That's my question.
As a part of a townhome development? No.
Yeah.
We've seen actually people, in fact, we already have 20-foot lot widths adopted in the city of Tulsa for townhomes in certain districts. And what we've often seen are the establishment of private access easements and the ability for someone to utilize either a rear access or something of that type in order to accommodate that. But as they go through that subdivision platting process, obviously utilities are a major component of that to break up those lots and create the 25-foot widths they want. And in that process, there's a lot of input from not just city utilities, but also the franchise utilities about what needs to happen there to make sure that that fits. And it's been accomplished in a few places by the use of those easements. But I guess one of the things on the inverse of that conversation is that where we do have alleyways, we certainly don't want to stand in the way of someone utilizing those for a development that makes sense and that can take that opportunity. If there is a lack of an alleyway in some of these situations and there's a prevention of that use being accomplished because of some infrastructure issue, I think that would be caught in that development process of them trying to get that established on that lot. So at the moment, it's almost like we're shifting it away from preventing it where it's already there, but also maybe encouraging it in a place where it could be utilized and used often, and giving people the way to come up with a creative solution otherwise. But I think that in looking at your comments, I agree that there's a certain need to discuss all of this and definitely talk about implications with our counterparts over in the city's infrastructure groups and the development services group as we move ahead. So
Those are my thoughts as well. Really, that's my recommendation, is that you get with them. When I started at the city many years ago, they were actively trying to close every alley. And what I'm hearing, some of these building types, they're going to work great with alleys, and they're probably not going to function at all without them. I mean, I really worry about housing over garage and those kinds of housing types that are great, but they may not be exactly what people want. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, Nathan, the housing over garage?
you mean just like an accessory dwelling unit, like a?
No, I'm talking about when you get those lots really skinny.
Oh, I see. You're talking about like a front loading garage, like a.
Yeah, well, it's basically your whole yard becomes a driveway.
Right.
And you don't have a front door, you just have a garage. So if you don't have an alley, you're going to end up with a little more of that.
That's a good point. No, I like I said, I really appreciate the comments. I think it's a very important thing that we think about when we're talking about how these lots establish. And we have some existing driveway widths and provisions about how much of a percentage you can cover of your yard with concrete, but hopefully we will be able to find a balance there to make sure that we don't end up in that situation that you're talking about. And I think it's certainly a noteworthy comment.
Well, I really think that your latest graphics, those black and whites, really help communicate that, and maybe you can get some skinnier ones drawn up. Seriously, I mean, I think you should use every opportunity you can to show the positives, show what you want. Zoning always says, "Hey, this is what we don't want." Just show pictures like you were earlier, and I think that'll do well. That's it for me. Sorry.
Well, thank you, Theron.
Yeah, thanks.
Is there opposition to this? I've not heard anything, and there always is. So I'm just curious if there is opposition.
I haven't heard anything in Highland. It's been a long time since
It has. Good to see and hear from everyone.
Yeah, I haven't heard any. I know that there's been a lot of conversation back and forth about just some of the details, but I don't think it's been any opposition. Have you, either Travis or Nathan?
No, not necessarily. We've heard a lot of people wanting it to make sure we're doing it right, which we certainly appreciate, but I don't recall anyone telling us not to do it at all. So
Great. Okay. Well, that's good. That'll be a first. So, every,
well,
every
as Susan mentioned earlier, we still have yet to mail out the, the mailing and the 300-foot, which will, I engage a lot more people in the conversation. So
yeah, it will. And there's always opposition. So just hang in there. This all looks good to me. Just getting back into the swing of the Pearl District and everything. So hope to see everybody soon, and we'll catch you at the next meeting.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So let me just start. So Julia says Crutchfield is opposed to apartments, but okay, I lost that. But anyway, so we know that we saw in the Crutchfield small area plan that was fairly recently adopted. I can't even remember how it ended up being written in the document, but I know that was a sentiment that was shared during that process. This goes back to the very beginning of missing middle and why it was important, because in the city of Tulsa, we have two main housing types. We have single family and these massive apartments, right? So I don't know if Crutchfield, for instance, I don't know if they would object to an 8-unit apartment, or if apartments are just that thing that we're used to seeing in Tulsa that are, these big scale buildings. So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd like to hear that for sure. We agreed on live work. Okay, yeah.
I think that's something too, just to kind of go further on that as we start talking about the specific geographies and how we apply the overlay in those areas, that we'll continue to receive feedback from each neighborhood about what they like or don't like about that particular proposal. And so certainly going to be more opportunities to think about that as we move to that next step.
So we have a hand up from Kevin Anderson. I will unmute you.
The Laura Dester Center is going to generate a tremendous parking need. Have they given any thought to doing what Kendall Whittier did? One of the reasons that area has been transformed is the availability of free parking right in the middle. And obviously there's very few places where that can occur in the Pearl District. But are we giving any thoughts to looking at that?
I would say, one, that the Lord Esther site, they did do a rezoning to MX zoning, which offered them quite a bit of reduction on the overall parking requirement for the project, just as a basis of the MX zoning. As a part of this project or this effort, we haven't really given any thought to that. But I do think the concept as a whole is something we are beginning to think differently about, in the idea of creative parking solutions, because we know that's something that districts demand in the city of Tulsa. So as we kind of vet those thoughts and go through that, I think you might see more efforts in the future in that direction. But currently, as a part of this overlay, we're really just more focused on the housing component and trying to accommodate those uses on some of those lots. And there is, in a lot of these neighborhoods, there is some on-street parking that can support non-residential uses. It doesn't offset any requirements for the residential uses that we're talking about. But if there are, live work situations or mixed use situations, those instances allow some counting of on-street parking as well where it's allowed. So I think they may benefit from that as well at that site in particular.
Well, what I'm dealing with is, the Pearl District is going to have bike lanes on 3rd, 6th, and 11th, and I've been told that Peoria is next. We're making it very difficult for businesses to survive if they don't have any parking. They can't provide those services to the residents that we're attracting to those neighborhoods.
Was parking maintained on some of those? I mean, I think on 6th Street, at least, we still have parking spaces between the bike and the lane. Is that
Occasionally.
occasionally?
I know in front of Papa Ganoush restaurant, I mean, there's like 2 or 3 parking spaces, which is pushing all the parking into the residential neighborhoods. And if we're going to put more residential in there, there needs to be a plan to accommodate all of that parking need for the residences as well as for the commercial that the residences need to go for services.
We didn't fully remove any of the parking requirements for the residential uses, so they'll at least provide for the units being proposed or projected as part of their development. But again, I don't disagree at all. We definitely have to start thinking creatively about how to solve parking in some of these districts. And Kendall Whittier is a good example. The centralized parking lot there has offered up kind of a relief in areas where other businesses wouldn't have had parking. And so I think using that as an example is going to kind of inform us as we move forward and work on some of that.
Kevin, are there any specific problems now, or is it really just like moving forward with as things begin to happen and develop a little more?
Other than getting the ticket the first day of they put the bike lanes in, the only other problem I had is that the bike, I mean, I know you're talking about housing, but the bikers don't, you can't hear them. You can't see them at night. And if they're right there when you're turning right, I've just about taken out 2 people with right-hand turns. They don't
slow down, man.
Well, they're the ones that need to slow down to go, okay, here's a car. They've got a signal on. They're going to turn right. Don't just try to blow past them.
And that maybe, also informs the idea of more signalization and ideas about how we, continue to keep people familiar with the new infrastructure that's being placed on these streets, because I think, as is with anything, there's a learning curve as things change that people have to adopt to and understand that exists. But how'd you get a ticket? Did you park on the bike lane?
No, I parked too close to 6th Street on Quaker.
Oh, you're giving them more room. That's good.
Kevin, I appreciate you engaging with us on this. There's a share the road. So INCOG, along with the city and some other partners, we're working on taking all of these different share the road type marketing campaigns and collaborating better, bringing them together and launching some stuff in June that is hopefully going to educate people that are locomoting in any manner about how to be more respectful of each other. It can't get out here fast enough. We're finally using some of those scooter fees to really put a lot of good information out there. Yeah, I like I said, it can't come fast enough, and hopefully that will help address some of that. But I'm mulling over what you're talking about. Is there a place for a town square type, like Kendall Whittier Square parking that could help? Yeah, we'll talk about it some more. I'm glad you're on here talking to INCOG too.
So we have a question from in the chat, just asking if we've identified specific streets, properties, or lots that would accommodate new housing types in the neighborhoods. So when we did our analysis looking at barriers in the zoning code, we did that based on the different lot patterns and existing layout of many of these neighborhoods. Can't say that there are specific streets or properties or lots that we've identified to say this would work here, this would work there. But I think generally across the board where we started, we had different numbers, and this gets into the details more than what we presented tonight, but the numbers for like your required lot widths or lot area, we dropped those down a little bit so that we could accommodate these housing types based on the neighborhoods and some of the vacant lots that we kind of surveyed throughout the study area. There's quite a variation, but I think the numbers and the overlay that we've proposed are gonna really make that possible for, I can't say every single property, but for most of those properties. So we certainly looked at that very closely and actually got some great input from some of our local builders and architects and designers and folks that could apply the zoning code. And even our staff looked at that pretty closely to make sure that that would make sense and would work for these neighborhoods if somebody wants to take advantage of this type of a program. So.
And Darren, you said to put up the info map. Let me make sure that this is the correct one.
I was just going to ask does this represent the extent of where those new housing types may be allowed?
Yeah, at least.
There.
So that's our preliminary thought. Yes.
Sure. And you already have RS5, which you can use a base zone in other parts of town if you want, which would allow some of this, correct?
Yeah, that's correct. We've got.
Yeah.
But that would be not, this is an overlay for the whole area. And
yeah, the geography of the
others
overlay would be based on the housing study boundary. And that's really just because it feels like the area where we were most informed to make that kind of a change in policy. And because we've done that housing study and seen that feedback, we can kind of more confidently move ahead in this area. But I think Susan, or maybe it was Travis, mentioned earlier, obviously that overlay tool is something that can be mimicked and adopted elsewhere. If there was another neighborhood with a desire to kind of get to those same standards, it could always be an option.
Yeah, we don't have much RS5 throughout the city.
No, but it's available for those who are interested in some of these housing types, but they're not within that boundary.
Correct. As are, we have mixed use zoning districts as well, kind of going back to, I think it was Julia's comment earlier about Crutchfield desiring more kind of live work situations where that could be more accommodated, and the design constraints within those districts are also kind of in line with what we're talking about here, in that they require buildings to be more street facing and have a certain level of transparency and that kind of thing. So there's always still options if someone were to desire something not allowed by the overlay, for them to discuss with our office and try to move that forward just through the typical zoning process.
Well, I think it sounds great. You've got my full support. I think this just continues what we started in 2015. And I think that, really just pay attention to those infrastructure impacts and get with the city afterwards. Make sure that they understand that this is really going to be returning to the way we used to build in many ways. And I think they'll get there with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Aaron. Yeah. Well, Amy, if you want to share our contact info one more time, just so everybody can jot that down if they come up with later questions or want to talk more about it, that will be helpful. Certainly appreciate you guys all joining our happy hour zoning code discussion.
Anything else before we sign off for the night? Again, Thursday night is another one more broadly applied citywide outside of the overlay, but some other things that we're doing with really a handful of a few things. So feel free to register and be part of that as well. But thanks for your time tonight. Okay, have a good night. See you
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks.